Rose Mitchell's hands trembled as she tucked away the last photo of her dead daughter and pulled out her forged nanny credentials outside the Thompsons' house. Behind that door waited her 5-year-old grandson, whose adoptive parents had no idea their new caregiver was the grandmother they'd been legally keeping away. The photograph trembled in Rose Mitchell's weathered hands as she stood before the Thompson family's cream-colored Victorian home. A light autumn breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and chrysanthemums across the manicured lawn. But Rose barely noticed, her attention fixed on the image of her pregnant daughter, Emily, smiling radiantly at the camera. It had been taken just 3 weeks before the complications that took both Emily and any semblance of normalcy from Rose's life. Almost mechanically, she tucked the photo into her leather portfolio, alongside her carefully crafted resume and fabricated references. The weight of what she was about to do pressed against her chest like a physical force. She had rehearsed her story countless times. Rose Wilson, 52, former elementary school teacher from Seattle, seeking a fresh start after her husband's passing. Each detail had been meticulously constructed to withstand scrutiny while staying close enough to the truth to be believable. The door chimes echoed through the house as Rose pressed the bell, her heart thundering against her ribs. Footsteps approached, and she forced her features into a pleasant, professional mask. Sarah Thompson opened the door, her blonde hair caught in a messy bun, designer glasses perched on her nose. She looked exactly as she had in the adoption agency's photographs. Young, successful, kind-faced. "Mrs. Wilson? Please, come in." Sarah's smile was genuine, sending a knife of guilt through Rose's chest. "You're right on time." The foyer opened into a living room that spoke of both wealth and warmth. Family photos lined the walls, and Rose's practiced composure nearly cracked when she spotted him. Marcus, her grandson, beaming from a frame above the fireplace. He had Emily's eyes, the same warm brown that had once looked up at Rose with unlimited trust and love. "Can I offer you some tea?" Sarah gestured toward the plush sofa. "David, my husband, is just finishing up a work call. He'll join us shortly. Tea would be lovely." "Thank you." Rose's voice remained steady, years of teaching experience helping her maintain control. As Sarah disappeared into the kitchen, Rose allowed herself a moment to study the room more carefully. Educational toys were scattered across a colorful play mat. A half-finished puzzle sprawled across the coffee table. Everything spoke of a loving, attentive family. David Thompson's entrance coincided with his wife's return. He carried himself with the confidence of a successful corporate liar, but his handshake was warm, his smile reaching his eyes. "Mrs. Wilson, welcome. We've been looking forward to meeting you." The interview proceeded smoothly, with Rose drawing upon her actual teaching experience to answer questions about child development and educational philosophy. She spoke of her fictional late husband with carefully measured grief, keeping the emotion real by channeling her loss of Emily into her words. "Marcus is a special child," Sarah explained, leaning forward. "We adopted him as a newborn, and we believe in being completely open with him about his adoption story. We want someone who's comfortable with that approach." Rose's throat tightened. "I believe honesty is crucial for a child's emotional development," she managed, the irony of her words burning like acid. "Though it must be handled with sensitivity and age-appropriate understanding." A noise from upstairs drew their attention, the sound of small feet padding across hardwood floors, followed by a child's voice calling out, "Mommy?" "Speaking of our little man," David smiled. "He's probably up from his nap." Sarah rose to get him, and Rose used the moment to steel herself. She had seen Marcus in photos, had even glimpsed him once at the park from a distance, but this would be different. This would be close, personal, real. When Sarah returned with a tousled-haired 5-year-old in her arms, Rose felt the world shift on its axis. Marcus had Emily's eyes, yes, but also her nose, the same slight curl to his hair. He regarded Rose with shy curiosity. half hiding his face in his mother's shoulder. "Marcus, this is Mamoris. Wilson, she might be coming to spend time with you while Mommy and Daddy are working." The boy peeked out, and Rose somehow found the strength to smile naturally. "Hello, Marcus. I heard you like dinosaurs." She nodded toward a plastic T-Rex near the puzzle. His face lit up. "T-Rex is the king. Do you know about dinosaurs?" "So," Rose replied, her heart aching with love and guilt in equal measure. "Maybe you could teach me more." The rest of the interview passed in a blur of conversation and paperwork. Rose presented her false documents, knowing they would hold up to scrutiny. She had paid dearly to ensure they would. As she prepared to leave, Sarah touched her arm gently. "There's something about you, Mrs. Wilson. Something trustworthy. We'll be checking your references, of course, but I have a good feeling about this." Rose nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she walked back to her car, Marcus's wave goodbye felt like both a blessing and a curse. She had taken the first step on a path that could either heal or destroy what remained of her heart. The week between the interview and the phone call felt like an eternity. Rose spent her days pacing her modest apartment, alternating between reviewing her fabricated background and staring at old photos of Emily. Her daughter's room remained untouched since the day she left for the hospital, a shrine to a future that never came to be. The room still held the faint scent of Emily's favorite lavender lotion, and sometimes Rose would sit there, surrounded by memories, wondering if she was honoring or betraying her daughter's memory with her deception. When Sarah Thompson finally called to offer her the position, Rose's hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. She accepted with carefully measured enthusiasm, agreeing to start the following Monday. That gave her 5 days to further prepare her persona as Rose Wilson and to quiet the voice in her head that whispered she was making a terrible mistake. The weekend before her first day, Rose visited Emily's grave. The autumn leaves crunched under her feet as she made her way through the cemetery, her daughter's favorite sunflowers clutched in her hands. The gravestone was simple, elegant. Emily Christine Mitchell, beloved daughter, gone too soon. Rose had chosen not to include dates. She couldn't bear to see the tragic brevity of her daughter's life carved in stone. "I found him, Emmy," she whispered, placing the flowers against the cool granite. "He's beautiful and healthy and so loved, just like we wanted for him." She traced the letters of Emily's name with trembling fingers. "I don't know if what I'm doing is right, but I promise I'll watch over him, just like he would have wanted." Monday arrived with crystal clarity, the kind of fall morning that Emily had loved best. Rose arrived at the Thompson house early, her practical clothes and sensible shoes chosen to match her constructed identity. Sarah greeted her with a coffee and a detailed schedule of Marcus's routine, while David rushed through the kitchen grabbing breakfast, already late for court. "Marcus is still a bit nervous about new people," Sarah explained, leading Rose upstairs to her son's room. "But he hasn't stopped talking about the dinosaur conversation from your interview." The boy's room was a testament to his interests. Dinosaur posters covered the walls, model planets hung from the ceiling, and books about everything from paleontology to space exploration filled the shelves. It was exactly the kind of room Emily had dreamed of creating for her child. Marcus sat cross-legged on his bed, clutching his favorite T-Rex plush. It regarded Rose with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. His brown eyes, Emily's eyes, wide and watchful. "Good morning, Marcus," Rose said softly, keeping her distance to let him set the pace. "I brought something you might like to see." She pulled a book from her bag, The Complete Guide to Dinosaurs, well-worn but lovingly maintained. It had been Emily's favorite book as a child. His interest visibly piqued. Marcus scooted closer to the edge of his bed. "Is that a real dinosaur book?" "It is." "Would you like to look at it together?" The morning unfolded gently, with Rose and Marcus exploring the book while Sarah prepared for work. Rose found herself slipping naturally into the role of caregiver. drawing upon both her teaching experience and the mothering instincts that had never faded. By the time Sarah left for her pediatric practice, Marcus was eagerly showing Rose his collection of dinosaur figures, explaining each one's characteristics with endearing seriousness. As the days passed, Rose discovered the complex dynamics of the Thompson household. Sarah, though deeply devoted to Marcus, struggled with the guilt of working long hours at her practice. David compensated by bringing work home when possible, often typing on his laptop while Marcus played nearby. They were good parents, loving and attentive, but their high-powered careers left gaps that Rose was hired to fill. Lauren, the family's social worker, made monthly visits to check on Marcus's adjustment. Each visit sent Rose's anxiety spiraling, though she maintained a careful distance during these times, busying herself with household tasks while Lauren spoke with the family. The social worker was sharp-eyed and intuitive, and Rose feared that one long look might unravel her entire charade. By the end of her first month, Rose had established herself as an integral part of the household. She arrived each morning at 7, prepared Marcus's breakfast, and guided him through a day filled with learning and play. She discovered his passion for stories, his careful way of organizing his toys, his tendency to scrunch his nose when concentrating, just like Emily had done. The guilt never fully subsided, but it was accompanied by moments of joy so pure they took her breath away. When Marcus first reached for her hand without prompting, when he fell asleep against her shoulder during story time, when he proudly showed her a drawing he'd made of Mrs. Wilson and me at the park, each moment was a gift she treasured, even as she questioned her right to receive it. One afternoon, while Marcus napped, Rose found Sarah in the kitchen, staring at a family photo with an uncertain expression. "Everything all right?" Rose asked, beginning to prepare Marcus's after-nap snack. Sarah sighed, adjusting her glasses. "I was just thinking about his birth mother. Sometimes I wonder what she was like, if Marcus has her smile or her laugh. The adoption was closed, so we know very little about her, except," she paused, swallowing hard, "except that she died shortly after he was born. One wish. I wish I could tell him more about her someday." Rose's hands froze over the apple she was slicing. The knife trembled slightly as she forced herself to continue the motion. "I'm sure," she said carefully, "that his birth mother would be grateful knowing he has such loving parents." Sarah smiled sadly. "I hope so. Sometimes I worry that we're not doing enough, that we're somehow failing her trust in us." "Trust me," Rose whispered, then quickly added, "From what I've seen, you're wonderful parents. Marcus is lucky to have you." The sound of small feet on the stairs ended their conversation, but the moment stayed with Rose, adding another layer to her growing emotional complexity. She was living a lie, yes, but she was also witnessing the truth of a family's love, participating in it, contributing to it. The lines between right and wrong, between truth and deception, grew blurrier with each passing day. The autumn routine had settled into a comfortable rhythm when the first crack appeared in Rose's carefully constructed facade. It began with a simple cold, Marcus waking up with a stuffy nose and slight fever. Sarah had left for an early surgery, and David was in court, leaving Rose to manage the situation. "My throat hurts," Marcus whimpered, curled up in his dinosaur pajamas. Rose pressed a cool hand to his forehead, recognizing the particular flush of his cheeks. Emily had gotten the same high color when feverish, and the family tendency towards severe tonsillitis had plagued 3 generations of Mitchells. "Let me look at your throat, sweetheart," Rose said, using her phone's flashlight. The sight confirmed her fears. His tonsils were swollen and spotted. She knew from bitter experience how quickly Mitchell infections could escalate. She called Sarah's office, careful to maintain her professional demeanor. "Dr. Thompson, I'm concerned about Marcus. His tonsils are quite inflamed, and there's some white spotting." Sarah's voice sharpened with maternal worry. I'll have my nurse call in a prescription for antibiotics. But Mrs. Wilson, how did you know to check his tonsils specifically? Rose's heart skipped. I had similar issues with children in my class. You learn to recognize the signs. The lie felt heavy on her tongue. Take him to the pharmacy on Oak Street. They know us there. I'll try to come home early. As Rose helped Marcus dress, his small body radiating heat, memories flooded back. Emily at 5, burning with fever, rushed to the emergency room with a penicillin allergy they hadn't known about until that moment. Rose's hands trembled as she buttoned Marcus's coat. Marcus, sweetheart, has mommy ever given you penicillin? For any infection? He shook his head, clearly miserable. Rose felt panic rising in her chest. The Mitchell penicillin allergy was hereditary, documented through 3 generations. If Sarah prescribed amoxicillin, at the pharmacy, Rose checked the prescription label with trembling hands. Amoxicillin, her worst fear confirmed. She clutched the prescription bag, paralyzed with indecision. To reveal her knowledge of Marcus's potential allergy would raise impossible questions. To remain silent could put him at risk. The pharmacist, an elderly man with kind eyes, noticed her distress. Everything all right, ma'am? Rose made a split-second decision. I'm concerned about possible allergies. Is there any way to check if Marcus has been tested for penicillin allergies? The pharmacist typed into his computer. I can check his medical history. You're authorized as his caregiver. Yes, Rose said, producing the authorization card Sarah had given her. Her pulse pounded in her ears as the pharmacist scrolled through records. No allergy testing on file, he reported. But if you're concerned, you should discuss it with his pediatrician. Rose nodded numbly, her mind racing. She couldn't give him the medication without warning Sarah. But how could she explain her concerns without revealing everything? Back in the car, Marcus dozed in his car seat while Rose sat paralyzed behind the wheel. She took out her phone, staring at Sarah's number. One call could protect Marcus, but destroy everything she'd built. The memory of Emily in that emergency room, her tiny body swollen and struggling to breathe, made the decision for her. She dialed Sarah's number, her hand shaking. Doctor? Thompson? I'm sorry to bother you again, but I've been reading about penicillin allergies, and given Marcus's adoption history, would it be possible to test him before starting the amoxicillin? A pause. What made you think about this specifically? Rose had prepared for this. I had a student once, adopted as well. There was an incident with an unknown inherited allergy. I'd never forgive myself if something happened because we didn't check. Another long pause. You're right. Bring him to my office instead of going home. We'll do a quick test before starting any medication. The drive to Sarah's pediatric practice felt endless. Marcus slept fitfully while Rose's mind spun through scenarios. She'd bought time, possibly saved him from a dangerous reaction. But at what cost? Her careful story had its first crack, and she knew from experience that cracks had a way of spreading. Sarah was waiting when they arrived, her professional demeanor tinged with maternal concern. As she prepared to do the allergy test, she gave Rose a long, thoughtful look. It's interesting that you thought of this. Most people wouldn't have made that connection. I suppose teaching makes you overcautious, Rose offered weakly. The test results appeared within minutes, a raised, angry welt that confirmed Rose's fears. Sarah stared at it, then at Marcus, then back at the test results. He's severely allergic, she said slowly. If we'd given him that prescription. She trailed off, then turned to Rose with an expression that made the older woman's blood run cold. Mrs. Wilson, I think we need to have a conversation about exactly how you knew to check for this. The sterile examination room suddenly felt airless. Marcus had fallen asleep on the padded table, his fever-flushed face peaceful, unaware of the tension building around him. Sarah crossed her arms, her professional facade cracking to reveal something harder underneath. Your student with the adoption history and the allergy. That wasn't just a random anecdote, was it? Sarah's voice was controlled, but her eyes were sharp behind her glasses. Rose felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. Years of teaching had taught her that sometimes the best defense was a partial truth. No, she admitted softly, it wasn't just an anecdote. Then, what exactly was it, Mrs. Wilson? Or is that even your name? Before Rose could respond, the door opened and Lauren, the social worker, stepped in. The timing couldn't have been worse. Sarah, I was in the building for another client and saw Marcus's name on the urgent list. Is everything okay? Sarah's expression shifted from accusatory to professional so quickly it was almost imperceptible. Lauren, perfect timing. We just discovered Marcus has a severe penicillin allergy. One that, interestingly enough, our nanny somehow suspected. Lauren's trained eye moved between the three of them. Marcus sleeping, Sarah's rigid posture, Rose's obvious distress. Perhaps we should continue this discussion in your office, Sarah. Mrs. Wilson can stay with Marcus while he rests. No, Sarah said firmly. I think Mrs. Wilson needs to be part of this conversation. Can you watch Marcus for a few minutes, Lauren? The walk to Sarah's office felt like a march to execution. Rose's mind raced through options, calculating the impact of various levels of truth. The office was warm and child-friendly, with colorful artwork on the walls and a shelf full of medical textbooks. Sarah closed the door with deliberate care. Start talking, she said, remaining standing while Rose sank into a chair. And please, this time, tell me the truth. Rose looked down at her hands, Emily's hands. Really, with the same long fingers and prominent knuckles. The allergy runs in families, she began slowly. It's hereditary. I knew because you're related to him. Sarah finished, her voice barely above a whisper. How? His birth mother died. We were told she had no living relatives. She was my daughter, Rose said, the words she'd held back for so long finally escaping. Emily. She died giving birth to Marcus, the adoption agency. They told me it would be better if I wasn't involved. Clean break, they said. New start for everyone. Sarah's legs seemed to give out, and she dropped into her chair. 5 months. You've been in our home for 5 months, lying to us every day. I never meant to interfere, Rose said quickly. I needed to know he was okay, to see him happy. I wasn't going to say anything ever, but today, when I realized about the medication, you could have found another way to warn us. Called the pharmacy anonymously. Something that didn't involve this violation of trust. Sarah's voice cracked on the last words. Would you have taken an anonymous call seriously enough? With him burning with fever, needing medication? Rose leaned forward. I couldn't take that risk. Not with Emily's son. Not with your son. A knock at the door interrupted them. Lauren entered, her expression concerned. Marcus is asking for his mom, and his fever's rising. Sarah stood, doctor mode engaging automatically. We need to get him started on non-penicillin antibiotics. This conversation isn't over, but right now, Marcus needs care. Please, Rose said, standing as well. Let me help. I know his family medical history. There might be other things you need to know. Sarah paused at the door, conflict evident on her face. Stay here. Lauren, would you mind staying with Mrs. ... with Rose? We need to sort this out properly, but first I need to take care of my son. The emphasis on the word "my" hit Rose like a physical blow. She sank back into the chair as Sarah left, leaving her alone with Lauren, who took the seat Sarah had vacated. How long have you been planning this? Lauren asked, her tone professional but not unkind. I didn't really. I saw the nanny position advertised and it felt like fate. Or maybe madness. Rose laughed hollowly. I know it was wrong, but when you've lost everything, when you've held your daughter's hand as she died, knowing her baby would live, but you'd never see him. Sometimes wrong and right get muddled. Lauren nodded slowly. The adoption agency should have handled this differently. Closed adoptions can be traumatic for all parties involved. But what you did, it's complicated things significantly. Are they going to press charges? Rose asked, her voice small. That depends on Sarah and David. But right now, we need to focus on Marcus. This revelation is going to affect him too, whether you intended it to or not. The weight of what she'd done, not just to Sarah and David, but potentially to Marcus, settled over Rose like a heavy blanket. She'd wanted to protect him, to be part of his life, but in doing so, she might have destabilized the very foundation of his world. The next few hours unfolded in a blur of medical procedures and tense conversations. Marcus's infection responded well to the alternative antibiotics, but the emotional fever in the clinic showed no signs of breaking. David arrived shortly after receiving Sarah's urgent call, his lawyer's composure cracking when he learned the truth about their trusted nanny's identity. "You ran background checks," he said to Lauren, pacing the small office where Rose still sat, feeling like a defendant awaiting sentence. "How did nothing show up?" "The documents were very well done," Lauren admitted, glancing at Rose. "I assume you had professional help?" Rose nodded, past the point of denial. "I sold my house, used the money to create a new identity. I know it was wrong, but wrong doesn't begin to cover it." David interrupted, his professional control slipping. "We trusted you with our son. You were in our home, part of our lives, all while lying to our faces." A knock at the door preceded Sarah's return. She looked exhausted, her earlier anger tempered by hours of focusing on Marcus's care. "He's asking for a Mars Wilson," she said, the words clearly difficult for her to speak. "He's worried because she usually reads him his dinosaur story when he's sick." The simple statement hung in the air, highlighting the complexity of their situation. Rose had become more than just a caregiver to Marcus. She was a constant in his daily life, a source of comfort and stability. "Does he know?" David asked softly. "About any of this?" Sarah shook her head. "He's too sick right now. And honestly, I don't know how we're going to explain this to him. He's 5. He barely understands adoption, let alone this." "I have his favorite book in my bag," Rose offered quietly. "The one about dinosaurs. It was Emily's, actually. I've been reading him the same stories I used to read to her." Sarah pressed her fingers to her temples, visibly struggling with the decision. "Lauren, what's your professional opinion here? About Marcus seeing her?" Lauren straightened in a chair, choosing her words carefully. Abrupt changes in routine can be traumatic for children, especially when they're ill. While we need to address the larger situation, immediately cutting off contact might do more harm than good. "You want us to continue allowing her access to our son?" David's voice rose incredulously. "Not unsupervised," Lauren clarified. "But yes, for Marcus's immediate well-being, maintaining some normalcy might be best. We can develop a transition plan once he's recovered." Rose sat silently, her heart pounding as her fate was discussed around her. The photograph of Emily seemed to burn in her pocket, a constant reminder of what had led her here. Sarah finally spoke, her voice tired but firm. "You can read to him. Once. While I'm in the room. After that, we'll need time to figure out how to handle this situation legally and practically." The walk to Marcus's examination room felt endless. He lay curled on his side, clutching his dinosaur plush, his fever-bright eyes lighting up when he saw Rose. "Mrs. Wilson, Mommy said you might not come. I brought your favorite book," Rose managed, fighting to keep her voice steady as she sat in the chair beside his bed, acutely aware of Sarah watching from the doorway. As she read, Rose felt the weight of what she might lose. Every gesture, every shared smile, every small moment of connection with her grandson had become precious to her. The story was one they'd read dozens of times, about a young T-Rex searching for his family. But today, the themes of belonging and identity felt painfully relevant. "Mrs. Wilson?" Marcus's voice was drowsy as the story ended. "Are you sad? You look sad." Rose felt tears threatening to fall. "Sometimes grown-ups get sad, sweetheart. But you don't need to worry about that. You just focus on getting better. Like the T-Rex in the story? He was sad, but then he found his family?" Sarah made a small sound from the doorway, something between a gasp and a sob. Rose carefully closed the book, her hands trembling. "Yes, something like that. Rest now, Marcus." As they left the room, Sarah stopped Rose in the hallway. "That book, you said it was Emily's?" "She made me read it to her every night for nearly a year when she was his age," Rose said softly. She used to say that T-Rex reminded her of herself, always looking for where she belonged. For a moment, something shifted in Sarah's expression, a flash of understanding, perhaps, or at least recognition of the shared love they both held for the child in the next room. But it passed quickly, replaced by the guarded look Rose had come to know over the past few hours. "David and Lauren are waiting in my office. We need to discuss what happens next." The fallout from Rose's revelation rippled through multiple lives in unexpected ways. While Marcus recovered in the hospital, his extended stay necessitated explanations to friends and neighbors about Mrs. Wilson's sudden absence. Sarah found herself crafting careful half-truths, a bitter irony not lost on her. Lauren, meanwhile, had begun investigating how Rose's false documentation had slipped through their screening process. This led her to Michael Chun, the adoption agency's director who had handled Marcus's case. His reaction to hearing Rose's name was telling. "I remember Emily Mitchell's case," he admitted during a conference call with Lauren and the Thompsons. "Her mother, Roz, she begged us to consider an open adoption. She had all these studies about the benefits for the child, the biological family, and you didn't think this was relevant information for us?" David's liar instincts were in full force. "We followed standard protocols for closed adoptions," Michael defended. Mrs. Mitchell was persistent. "We had to issue a formal warning about attempting contact. After that, she seemed to accept the situation. We never imagined she'd go to these lengths." Sarah, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. "Did you have Emily's complete medical history? Because we just discovered Marcus has a severe penicillin allergy, one that could have been fatal if Mrs. Mitchell hadn't intervened." A lengthy pause followed. "Medical histories were provided to the extent they were available," Michael said carefully. "But yes, there may have been gaps in our documentation, gaps that could have killed our son." Sarah's voice shook with barely contained anger. "While you were so focused on maintaining separation between biological and adoptive families, did anyone consider the medical implications?" The conversation sparked an internal review at the agency, but for the Thompsons, it raised uncomfortable questions about other potential health issues they might not know about. This led Sarah to reach out to Rose, albeit through Lauren, requesting a complete family medical history. Rose sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by medical records and family documents she'd kept meticulously organized since Emily's death. Her hands trembled as she documented generations of health information, not just the penicillin allergy, but the family history of heart conditions, the early onset arthritis that had plagued her mother's side, Emily's childhood asthma. As she wrote, memories surfaced. Emily at 7, learning to use an inhaler. At 12, being diagnosed with the same mild heart murmur Rose's father had had. At 23, glowing with pregnancy, despite the doctor's concerns about her heart condition. Each medical note was a story, a piece of Marcus's heritage that he had a right to know. Meanwhile, the Thompsons' close friend and neighbor, Grace Martinez, provided unexpected perspective. A family court judge, she had seen countless cases involving adoption and family rights. Over wine one evening, she listened to Sarah's conflicted feelings about the situation. You know, Grace said thoughtfully. I had a case last year. Different circumstances, but similar themes. A biological grandmother had been secretly volunteering at her grandchild's school. When the adoptive parents found out, their first reaction was anger, betrayal. But as we worked through it, something interesting emerged. Sarah traced the rim of her wine glass. What? The child had formed a genuine bond with this woman, not because of biological connection, but because of real, day-to-day interactions. The question became, was it fair to sever that bond because of the adult's conflict? Marcus asks about her every day, Sarah admitted. He doesn't understand why Mrs. Wilson, Rose, stopped coming. David wants to press charges, but you're thinking about Marcus. Grace finished. About what's best for him. Across town, Rose received an unexpected visit from her sister, Catherine, who had flown in upon hearing about the situation. Catherine found Rose surrounded by photo albums and medical records. You're not eating, Catherine observed, taking in her sister's haggard appearance. And when did you last sleep? I need to finish this medical history for Sarah. Dr. Thompson, Rose corrected herself. There might be something else they need to know about, something I haven't thought of. Catherine sat beside her sister, gently closing the photo album. Rose, talk to me. Really talk to me. What were you thinking? I wasn't, Rose whispered. Or maybe I was thinking too much. Every day after Emily died, I wondered where he was, if he was safe, if he was happy. When I saw that job posting, it felt like a sign. I told myself I'd just check on him, make sure he was okay. But then I met him, and he was so much like her, Catherine. His laugh, the way he scrunches his nose when he's thinking. Oh, Rosie, Catherine sighed, pulling her sister into a hug. You should have told me. We could have found another way. Would we? The adoption agency made it clear. No contact, no exceptions. But he's all I have left of her. All I have left of my baby girl. The sisters sat in silence, surrounded by the fragments of their family history. Finally, Catherine spoke. Maybe it's time to let the truth help heal instead of hurt. All these records, these stories, they're Marcus's heritage. They're part of who he is, even if the way you went about sharing them was wrong. Rose looked at the medical history she'd been compiling, seeing it now not just as a document of facts, but as a bridge, a possible way to begin rebuilding trust with the Thompsons, to show them that her intentions, however misguided her actions, had always been about Marcus's well-being. The pivotal moment came 3 weeks after the revelation, during a meeting at Lauren's office. The room was arranged carefully, neutral territory for all parties involved. Rose arrived first, clutching a thick folder of medical records and family history. The Thompsons entered minutes later, Sarah looking exhausted from juggling her medical practice with Marcus's recovery. David's lawyer mask firmly in place. Lauren began by addressing the immediate concern. Marcus's increasing anxiety about Mrs. Wilson's absence. He's showing signs of separation distress, she explained. His teacher reports he's become withdrawn at school, and he's having nightmares. He keeps asking if she left because he was sick. Sarah added quietly. No matter how many times we tell him it's not his fault, he doesn't believe us. Rose's heart clenched. I never wanted to cause him pain. Any of you pain. Yet here we are, David said. But his tone lacked its earlier anger, replaced by something more complex, exhaustion, perhaps, or resignation. The tension in the room shifted when Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out Marcus's favorite dinosaur book, the one that had belonged to Emily. He won't sleep without this now, she said, placing it on the table between them. Last night, he asked me if I knew why Mrs. Wilson knew all the dinosaur facts without looking at the pages. He said it was like she'd read it 1,000,000 times before. Rose stared at the worn book. Its spine cracked in exactly the same places it had been when Emily was small. She made me read it every night for years, she said softly. Even as a teenager, when she was sick, she'd ask for it. Said it reminded her of simpler times. Something in Sarah's expression changed. Tell me about her. About Emily. Not just her medical history, though we need that too, but who she was. Marcus has a right to know about his birth mother, and we have a right to know who she was. The request caught Rose off guard. She opened her mouth, closed it, then reached for her purse with trembling hands. She withdrew a photograph, not the one she usually carried, but one taken just months before Emily's death. In it, Emily sat in a garden, her pregnant belly prominent, her face glowing as she looked at the camera. She was a teacher, like me. Special education. She had this gift for reaching children others had given up on. Rose's voice grew stronger as she spoke. She loved thunderstorms and hated olives. She collected small rocks from every place she visited. When she found out she was pregnant, she was terrified but determined. Her heart condition. The doctors warned her, but she said this baby, Marcus, was her miracle. Sarah reached for the photo, her professional composure cracking as she studied Emily's face. "He has her smile," she whispered. "I always wondered where that smile came from." The medical records. Rose continued, pushing the folder forward. They're comprehensive. 3 generations back. But I wrote down everything I could remember about Emily, her childhood, her dreams, her favorite books. Things Marcus might want to know someday. David, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Why didn't you come to us directly? Why the deception?" "Because I was afraid," Rose admitted. "Afraid you'd say no. Afraid I'd never get to see him. Afraid I'd lose my last connection to Emily. But I see now that fear made me do something unforgivable. I violated your trust, your home, your family. Our family," Sarah said suddenly, looking up from the photo. "That's just it, isn't it? Whether we like it or not, our families are connected through Marcus, through Emily." Lauren, who had been quietly observing, leaned forward. "Perhaps that's what we need to focus on now. Not the past deceptions, but the future. What's best for Marcus going forward? He needs stability," David began, but Sarah interrupted him. "He needs truth," she said firmly. "Age-appropriate truth, but truth nonetheless. We've always said we'd be open with him about his adoption. How can we do that while pretending the grandmother who's been in his life for months doesn't exist?" The moment hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Rose hardly dared breathe, watching as Sarah and David exchanged a long look. Years of partnership allowing for silent communication. "We need boundaries," David finally said. "Clear, legal, written boundaries. And time to rebuild trust. To figure out how to explain this to Marcus. To process everything ourselves." "I'll accept any boundaries you set," Rose said quickly. I just want to be part of his life. In whatever way you deem appropriate." Sarah picked up the dinosaur book, running her fingers over its worn cover. "Maybe we start here," she said quietly. "With stories. With truth. With building something new from the pieces of what's broken." The days following the meeting brought shifts both subtle and profound. The Thompsons decided to begin with small, controlled steps. Supervised visits in Lauren's office, where Rose could share stories about Emily while professionals monitored Marcus's reactions. The first session was scheduled for the following week, giving everyone time to prepare. Rose spent hours with Catherine, rehearsing how to explain things to Marcus in child-appropriate terms. "Remember," Catherine cautioned, "he's 5. Everything needs to be simple, concrete. How do you explain something this complicated to a child?" Rose asked, surrounded by photos she'd carefully selected. Emily as a child, as a teenager, as a young teacher. How do you tell him his babysitter is actually his grandmother without making him feel deceived? Meanwhile, Sarah and David sought counsel from Dr. Martinez, a child psychologist specializing in adoption issues. Her office, filled with toys and art supplies, provided a stark contrast to their serious discussion. Children his age understand family relationships primarily through their daily experiences, Dr. Martinez explained. Marcus already has a positive relationship with Rose. That's actually helpful in this situation. The challenge is helping him understand how this relationship fits into his expanding view of family. Sarah twisted her wedding ring nervously. We've always told him he grew in another mommy's tummy before coming to us. But now, adding this new layer, think of it as adding to his story, not changing it, Dr. Martinez suggested. You're not taking anything away from his existing family structure. You're enriching his understanding of where he comes from. The morning of the first supervised visit arrived with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Rose arrived early, setting up Emily's photos and the dinosaur book on Lauren's coffee table. She'd chosen to wear the same cardigan she'd worn as Mrs. Wilson, hoping to provide some visual continuity for Marcus. Sarah brought Marcus in, his small hand clutching his T-Rex plush. He lit up at seeing Rose, then looked uncertainly at his mother, picking up on the unusual situation. Marcus, Sarah began gently, settling him on the couch between herself and Rose. Remember how we talked about the mommy who grew you in her tummy? He nodded, clutching his dinosaur tighter. Before I came to you and Daddy. Well, Sarah continued, her voice steady despite her obvious emotion. That mommy, her name was Emily. She had a mommy too, just like everyone has a mommy. Rose carefully slid forward the photo of Emily in the garden. This is Emily, she said softly. She was my daughter, which makes me my other mommy's mommy. Marcus asked, his brow furrowed in concentration. That's right, Lauren interjected gently. Some people call that a grandmother. Marcus studied the photo, then looked at Rose with new intensity. Is that why you knew all the dinosaur stories? Because you told them to her too? Rose felt tears welling up, but forced them back. Yes, sweetheart. This book? It was Emily's favorite when she was little, just like it's your favorite now. Did she like corrects best too? His voice was eager now, finding something concrete to connect with. Actually, Rose smiled, pulling out another photo. She loved Triceratops. See? This was her favorite toy when she was your age. The session continued, with Marcus asking simple questions that gradually built a picture he could understand. He was particularly interested in the fact that Emily had been a teacher, just like Miraz. Wilson had said she was. So you didn't lie about being a teacher, he said suddenly, showing unexpected insight. The adults exchanged glances. No, Rose acknowledged carefully. I was always a teacher, but I did tell some untruths about other things, and that was wrong of me. Because you missed Emily? He asked, his small face serious. Yes, Rose whispered. And because I wanted to know you. But I should have talked to your mom and dad first. Sarah, who had been quietly supporting Marcus through the conversation, spoke up. Mrs. Wilson, Rose cares about you very much. And if you want, she can keep being part of your life. But in a different way now, with everyone knowing the whole truth. Can she still read me stories? Marcus asked, looking between his mother and Rose. We're going to figure out new ways to spend time together, Sarah assured him. Different from before, but special in its own way. As the session drew to a close, Marcus had one more question. Did Emily like ice cream? Because Mrs. Wilson always knows my favorite flavor. Rose laughed through tears. Chocolate chip mint, right? That was Emily's favorite too. Some things just run in families. The simple observation seemed to satisfy him in a way the more complicated explanations hadn't. As they prepared to leave, he carefully placed the dinosaur book in Rose's hands. Can you bring more pictures next time? Of Emily with the Triceratops? Next time, Sarah confirmed, making eye contact with Rose. It was a small promise, but a significant one. After they left, Lauren turned to Rose. That went better than expected. He's so much like her, Rose said softly. The way he processes things, looking for concrete connections. Emily was the same way at his age. The Thompsons are taking a huge risk here, Lauren reminded her. They're choosing to trust you again, for Marcus's sake. I know, Rose nodded. And this time, I won't let any of them down. The real test came 3 months into their new arrangement. Marcus was scheduled for a routine tonsillectomy, a procedure recommended after his recurring infections. The surgery itself was minor, but it brought all the complex dynamics of their situation to a head. Rose received the news during one of their now regular supervised visits. Next Thursday, Marcus announced, proud of his growing medical knowledge. Doctor, Mom says they're gonna fix my throat so it doesn't hurt anymore. Sarah, who had been watching their interaction, added softly, given the family history, his aunt agrees it's the best option. The words family history hung in the air, a reminder of how their lives had become intertwined. Rose clutched her hands together to keep them from shaking. Emily had undergone the same procedure at almost exactly Marcus's age. I know it's not my place. Rose began carefully, but Emily had complications with anesthesia. It's documented in the medical history I provided, but I don't know if it's in his pre-op notes. Sarah interrupted, her professional tone softening. That's actually why I wanted to talk to you today. His surgeon suggested having as much family medical history present as possible, just in case. David and I discussed it, and we think you should be there. The offer stunned Rose into silence. It was Lauren who spoke first. This would be a significant step. Are you all prepared for what that means? Marcus will be in surgery for about an hour, Sarah explained. Having Rose there, it's not just about the medical history. He's been asking if his Story grandmother will visit him in the hospital. Story grandmother had become Marcus's term for Rose, a name that acknowledged their connection while respecting the boundaries of their new relationship. Each visit now included not just stories about Emily, but family history shared through carefully chosen photographs and mementos. The day of the surgery arrived with a pride-on chill. Rose found herself in the hospital waiting room with Sarah and David, the three of them creating an awkward triangle of concern. Marcus had been unusually quiet during pre-op, clutching his dinosaur plush and looking small in the hospital gown. Emily had the same plush, Rose said softly, breaking the tense silence. She named hers Rex. Not very original, but she was 5. Marcus named his Rex too. David responded, surprising both women. It was the first time he'd engaged directly with these connections to Marcus's biological history. The surgeon appeared then, her scrubs already on. We're ready. The anesthesiologist has been briefed on the family history. Mrs. Mitchell, you mentioned a specific reaction? Rose stepped forward, providing detailed information about Emily's response to certain medications. As she spoke, she felt Sarah's hand brush against hers, not quite holding it, but offering silent support. The wait was excruciating. Rose found herself sharing more stories about Emily, not just the medical ones, but small details. How she loved rainy days, how she could never keep her shoes tied, how she dreamed of being a mother. She would have loved you both, Rose said suddenly, surprising herself. As Marcus's parents, she always said what mattered most was love, not blood. Sarah's professional composure cracked slightly. Sometimes I wonder if she knew somehow that we'd be his parents. The adoption agency said she specified wanting educators, people who'd understand learning differences. She did know, Rose whispered. Somehow, she knew. The surgeon's return stopped all conversation. Her expression was serious, but not alarmed. There was a minor reaction to the initial anesthesia, nothing severe, but it confirmed the family history concerns. We adjusted quickly, and he's doing fine now. He's in recovery, asking for his Story grandmother. The 3 adults exchanged glances. It was David who spoke first. Rose, Why don't you go with Sarah? He'll want to see both of you when he wakes up properly." The recovery room was dim and quiet. Marcus small and pale against the white sheets. His dinosaur was tucked safely beside him, and his eyes fluttered open as they approached. "Mom?" He called softly, then seeing Rose, added, "Story, Grandma? Did they fix my throat like they fixed Emily's?" "They did, sweetheart," Sarah soothed, stroking his hair. "And you were so brave. Just like Emily," Rose added softly. Marcus drifted between sleep and wakefulness, holding both their hands, bridging the gap between his past and present. In that moment, watching Sarah tend to Marcus with such loving care while honoring Emily's memory, Rose finally felt the weight of her deception fully lift. This was what Emily would have wanted. Not secrets and lies, but open hearts and shared love. Marcus was blessed not with one family or the other, but with both, each bringing their own gifts to his life. 1 year after the surgery, the Thompsons' backyard hosted a gathering that would have seemed impossible months earlier. It was Marcus's 6th birthday, and around the dinosaur-themed party decorations, a new kind of family had formed. Rose arrived early, helping Sarah arrange cupcakes decorated with tiny plastic dinosaurs. Their movements around each other had developed an easy familiarity, born of shared concern for Marcus and countless supervised visits that had gradually become more relaxed. "He wants to show you something before the other kids arrive," Sarah said, nodding toward the house. "He's been working on it all week." In Marcus's room, now featuring both dinosaur posters and framed photos of Emily, the boy proudly displayed a school project, a family tree drawn in crayon, spreading across a large piece of construction paper. Unlike traditional trees, this one had multiple branches growing together, decorated with dinosaur stickers. "See?" He pointed excitedly. "Mom helped me make it special. These are Mom and Dad, and these are my birth mom, Emily, and you. And these are all my grandparents." Rose studied the creative genealogy, noting how Marcus had drawn all his family members holding hands across the branches. The school project had become something more, a child's understanding of his complex family story, represented with dinosaurs and crayons and love. "Your teacher approved this?" Rose asked, glancing at Sarah. She said it was the most creative family tree she'd seen. Sarah smiled. "And it led to some good discussions in class about different types of families." The party itself was a testament to their new normal. David manned the grill while chatting with Catherine, who had become an unexpected bridge between the families. Lauren attended not as a supervisor, but as a guest, watching with professional satisfaction as her former case evolved into something textbook programs might study. As Marcus opened presents, Rose noticed how naturally he moved between his different family members, sharing his excitement with everyone equally. When he opened Rose's gift, a carefully preserved collection of Emily's childhood books, he immediately asked Sarah to read one with them, creating yet another moment of connection. The real surprise came after the other guests had left. David, who had maintained the most distance throughout the year, approached Rose with an envelope. "We've been thinking," he said, his lawyer demeanor softened by the day's celebrations, "about making this official. Legal grandparent rights with structured visitation and holiday arrangements. If you're interested." Rose's hands trembled as she opened the envelope, finding preliminary legal documents inside. "Are you sure?" "Marcus needs his whole family," Sarah said, joining them. "These past months have shown us that keeping his history alive, having you in his life, it makes him more secure, not less. He knows how many people love him. Besides," David added with an unexpected smile, "it's getting exhausting having Lauren supervise every visit. We trust you now, Rose. You've earned it back." As if summoned by the conversation, Marcus appeared, clutching his dinosaur and Emily's favorite book. "Story time?" he asked hopefully. "With both Mom and Story Grandma?" They settled on the patio furniture, Marcus between Sarah and Rose, as the evening light painted the sky in soft colors. Rose opened the worn book, feeling the weight of Emily's memory and Marcus's future in its pages. Once upon a time, she began, there was a young dinosaur who discovered that families could be bigger than he ever imagined. The story continued, but Rose found herself watching Marcus's face instead of the pages. He mouthed certain words along with her, just as Emily used to do, while snuggling closer to Sarah with the complete security of a child who knew he was loved. In the growing dusk, Rose could almost imagine Emily sitting with them, approving of this blend of past and present, of birth family and adoptive family, of loss and love and redemption. The lies that had brought them here had been transformed into deeper truths. That family could expand without breaking, that love could multiply without dividing, that stories could bridge the gaps between hearts. As Marcus drifted to sleep between them, Sarah gently took the book from Rose's hands. "Same time next week?" she asked softly. "Without Lauren this time?" Rose nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She had lost a daughter, but gained a larger family, one built on truth and forgiveness rather than deception. Marcus would grow up knowing all of his story, the pain and the joy, the loss and the love. "Story, Grandma?" Marcus mumbled sleepily. "Will you bring more pictures next time? Of Emily and the dinosaurs?" "Of course, sweetheart," Rose whispered. "We have so many more stories to share." And in that moment, under the deepening purple sky, surrounded by birthday decorations and family, both old and new, Rose finally felt at peace. The secrets were gone, replaced by open hearts and shared memories. Marcus would grow up knowing not just where he came from, but where he belonged in this beautiful, complicated, love-filled family that had grown strong enough to embrace all of its truth. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love for you to support us by leaving a like and subscribing to our Slices of Life channel. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Which city are you talking about? It's very rewarding for us to provide our followers with an enjoyable moment. We appreciate the unconditional support you show us in every story. Blessings!